Okay, so we're live on the airwaves quickly
Oh.
after last time. Back very quickly, a little bit of a addenda to the last one. Last one we looked at kind of a knife attack, which was kind of that one where the guy was pricking from a distance. I saw almost immediately after we finished the last one, I saw another video flash up on my feed, which I thought, wow, that was really interesting, and it kind of makes some more points. So thought maybe we should get together quickly to discuss it. I noticed you've got the soft tone filter on. Are you it's like,
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. Yeah, I think it's
Sunday
to hide my
soft
wrinkles.
tones.
How's that? How's that? Is
Well,
that better?
that's scary. That's here
Yeah,
is
yeah,
Johnny.
yeah. I'll stick the lamp away. How's that? Am I coming to life?
Oh yeah. I think you've probably got a fingerprint on the camera or something. But
I need the soft filter here. Let me try. You might be right, actually. You know, there we go.
oh, that's better. Yeah. Back to
Looking like an old boat shoe. Thanks.
I thought you'd been having the Botox in the forehead or something, but
not yet. There's not enough Botox for my forehead, Chief. You know that.
Classic. Okay, yeah. So let's without further ado, let's crack on, because I'm interested to see what you make of this one. So it's another knife attack. I won't give you. There's a little bit of description at the bottom. I won't give any more description than that. But can you see the warning sign?
I've got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it is quite distressing. So if you are of a weak disposition, any of our viewer, you should look away now, or just sort of kind of suck it up and watch. Really, here we go.
It's still warning me.
See it now?
No, still warning me.
Oh no. Really? We got the same problem with you're still seeing the warning sign.
Yeah.
I wonder why that is.
Can you explain it through the medium of interpretive dance?
I could do, yeah. Jazz dance only.
Oh, hang on, something's appeared. I've got the image now, but it's a little bit through. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so I think we did this last time actually, and it's just a case of we have to play it through the screen without me putting it on full screen. All right, technical stuff is not my kind of thing. So let me play it, see if you can see it.
Right.
It should change scene in a second. Yeah.
Got you.
Yeah. All right. Just focusing on that bit then.
I'll ignore the text, but yeah. Nothing screams safe environment like a late night chicken shop, does it?
Where we would normally hang out.
Yeah. Okay, so neither are customers. All right. Oh, fucking hell, he's getting it. Oh, one for the camera. God, he's up and ambulatory. That's, I think, fucking more luck than anything else.
Friends laughed at me for buying.
Do you want to see it again?
How he ended up?
Hey, yes, shish kebab.
Oh God!
Shouldn't laugh, but yeah, that's an unfortunate advert to follow with, isn't it? Right?
And the algorithms are picking up on that. There,
ended up looking like a chicken's ass.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he's lucky it wasn't worse. But
yeah. Do you need to see it again, or you're done?
I think that's all right. I think that's all right. Yeah, I think if we miss anything, we can go back to it.
We can go back to it.
Yeah. So so neither of them were punters. Clearly, he was escaping into someone escaped into the chicken shop, held the door closed. Guy, nice defensive front kick, booted the door the wrong way on the hinges, which was actually quite slick, and sort of carried on motoring after him. And then it was all a bit tragic. There was, the guy sort of immediately went to the ground and then just lay there and got, chefed up for about a minute. I mean, that's pretty harrowing.
Yeah.
That is not,
Bit of seasoning on top, right?
Yeah.
Salt and pepper while he's getting shished up. But,
and with like a proper, your kitchen carving knife, not some like horrible zombie thing. That's something pulled from, your mum's kitchen drawer.
Yeah, good point. I mean, we hear so much about kind of bans on zombie knives and stuff like this, and tactical knives, as though the Crims are actually buying those. No, it's fanboy internet warriors who are buying the tactical black CRKT folding meat cleaver or whatever it is, right, for holding in their back pocket on a clip so every other fanboy can see it. But actually, the style of knife has nothing to do with the use in criminality or its dangerousness. And that was just your chef's knife off the cheap chef knives off the kitchen top.
Yeah. It looked like those trading ones that we blunted down ages ago. But so there's a couple of things that sort of jump out. First of all, the moment that he got into the chicken shop, he had intent of stabbing the guy for whatever reason. It was focused on one individual. It wasn't, stab everybody in the vicinity. Your man went to the ground and then just, I'm not being disparaging, but just took it all. There wasn't even a sort of putting his hands up almost. He didn't even kick his legs out. He didn't push anything. There was no reaction. He's lying on the floor. Your man goes to work, and then he has enough time to get his phone, not open it properly, sort it out, give him a quick kick. No movement from your man on the ground, but that's not because he couldn't move, because he got up and walked away at the end of it. And then, chip shop owner or whoever it was comes walking in at the end and just sort of gently ushers him out like it's the end of a wedding, and he's saying sort of which way to go for the sort of the bus to the reception. And there was no violence towards him.
No.
Clearly very, very specific in how it was targeted. But
and lucky he didn't just get one by random, right?
He just turned around and stick him because surely the guy's amped up, Yeah. So, yes, very interesting. A couple of things. So, I think first of all, from a combatives perspective, from a sort of self-protection perspective, you clearly will not do anything heroic that you have not trained to do. Because if you're being chased by a guy with a knife into a chicken shop at night, it's probably not random. You're probably involved in some way that has brought that upon you. So I don't know what that situation is, but generally, if you are sort of, someone from the streets that has that kind of beef, I'm sure you hold yourself in high regard on how you can mix it up and what you do to someone, and some ego there that you would do a thing if a thing happened or what have you, and clearly you do not. If you are not ready for that, the best he could do was hold a door closed and try and get on the other side of it. And he didn't do that very well. That got kicked in, and he just sort of went, woo. So yeah, if you're not going to do anything heroic, no matter what you think. Yeah.
Some good point. I didn't look up the situation, but I'm sure we can probably guess that it was some sort of gang related activity or something like that, especially with taking the photo afterwards. It looks like proof of event, humiliation, whatever it is, initiation and or sending photos humiliated after being stabbed up. So it looks like some sort of gang beef, street beef, something like that, which for you and I, that's generally not something that we're going to be involved in. Although, we might be involved in the aftermath, or we might be involved as a third party, as someone not necessarily in a chicken shop restaurant, but in a kebab house after watching a band at Rock City or something like that. Often,
It's
a few
not
times I've been
impossible.
to see music, and when we've been together, you go and grab a kebab afterwards, or you have a curry beforehand, or whatever it is that you do. There's always a capacity for being embroiled in violence that isn't of your making. So you can be stood around. We live in a violent city where knife crime is quite high, so the possibility of being in that environment is possible, even if we're not involved in the kind of the gang setting. But also if you're just a youth, right? If you're between the age of 16 and 28, liberally calling 28-year-olds youths, but younger people, you're out and about in town, then you're, even if you're a decent, upstanding, sensible young person, your possibility of being targeted, I guess, goes up quite significantly. Because you're spending more time, you look more like they do, and so and so not sure what it was about, but it was fairly targeted. And I think the point about if he is living that kind of life, living on the edges of criminality, then you're expecting, you're living in a violent world, or a potentially violent environment a lot of the time. You're probably taking precautions. You've probably experienced violence quite a bit. And actually, he didn't rise to what he probably would boast he would have done, right? And that's a lesson for all of us, right? You hear, I think you mentioned it before. I just see red, mate. I just see red. So I see red, and all hell breaks loose. It's chaos, it's carnage. No one who has ever done any martial arts training for any length of time would ever say such a thing, right? And it just betokens this kind of wishful thinking of how people overrate their chances. And once you've done some training, you realize that your chances aren't that great. They might be better than average, but they're not that great. And actually, if someone involved in that kind of lifestyle, we can assume, doesn't raise their game anywhere near to what they would probably say they would have done in that situation. I would have fucked him up. I would have done this. I would have done that. Then a chance of your average kind of decent person who's not used to living in that sort of environment, is not used to that kind of level of threat, is not switched onto it, to suddenly go from zero to what's necessary is a massive jump, right? A massive psychological jump. And if you're not prepared for that, if you've never seen that, if you've never contemplated it, then you're not gonna suddenly rise to your level of utopian thinking on that.
Absolutely. And sort of a couple of more things, but staying on that, even if you are, you've got the punch bag hanging in, your back garden, and you're out there whacking it, and you think, I can throw a proper punch. That is not preparing you for the adrenaline, that absolute adrenal stress situation of somebody booting a door in and coming at you with a knife in the street, in an environment you're not necessarily expecting it, surrounded by what look like normal people. There's a couple of women that look like they were leaving there just before, so it doesn't look like the worst part of town, and maybe not at the worst time of day or night. You might be able to chuck a great punch, but unless you've done something under stress, under duress, against a committed attacker, you have no concept of how you'll react.
And even as a third party there, right? They look very young. All the shop workers and that look quite young, but but even if older people, a bit more experienced and so on, again, you hear what no one did anything. They stood and watched. One moved behind a table, another one moved out the way, and then when the stabbing really started, he moved probably behind a counter or something. Probably get the Nando's seasoning or something. But no one did anything, right? They didn't help in any way, shape, or form, despite the fact that most people would kind of say, oh yeah, well, why didn't anyone do anything? Typical cowards, right? I would have done this, I would have done that, I would have done this, and actually, you know, what you say you do and what you would actually do is two different things. Because if you haven't practiced doing it, you're going to revert to what, you know,
what your brain wants.
Yeah, and the things that are familiar in that environment. Well, what do the shop workers do? Well, they move behind the tables. They start to probably sort out the napkins or something like that, because, you know, and if they say, well, you know, why did you move behind the counter? They probably can't answer that. They just don't even remember doing it. They just did it, right? The idea that they would suddenly jump in, or that two or three of them would organize in that moment to jump in is you know, you'd hope you'd do something, or maybe you'd hope you'd consider doing something. I'm not sure if, you know, two bottom feeders are having a fight and they're pulling out knives, whether I really want to, you know, if they look like a couple of scrows, you know, you've got to make a judgment whether you really want to risk your own life to intervene into some kind of gang affair. You know, is it really worth the risk? Yeah, but no one picked up a chair and cracked him over the head. No one picked up one of the tables and drove him into the wall, right? No one went behind the counter and came back with a saucepan.
That big long thing that cuts the elephant's leg. Yeah.
Come back with a mop and like bend it over his head, as you see in some videos. But yeah, no one came back with the chip pan and you know, melted his face off or anything like that, which would probably been quite reasonable in that situation. Like, you know, dump the hot chip fat over his head. You know, that would have stopped him pretty quick. But no one did anything, and that's because, yeah, you know, you can talk a good game, but when it comes to it, most of us, you know, how we truly know how we react. But certainly, if you've never thought about it, you've never practiced anything like it, then the chances of pulling stuff out the bag are minimal. Not impossible. I mean, you know, we saw a couple of incidents recently, like the tragic stabbing of several young girls at the Taylor Swift birthday party. You know, the PI, the physical trainer, the guy that was a personal trainer. He apparently, you know, he realized something was going on. He ran in to kind of try and stop the attacker. You know, there's someone that you know, probably didn't think too much about it, just did something, you know, reacted in the way that many of us would hope. But, you know, I think that's the exception. It tends to be the exception rather than the norm, because we see so many people just stood back watching, right, despite the fact that they'd say they'd do all these kind of other things. So just
people are too shocked. I think sort of slightly on that vein, that sort of not necessarily the ego-driven thing, but perhaps a self-reliance on your innate abilities under duress for self-preservation. I don't mean like suddenly turn into like the bus stop boxer and tune everyone up in the place, but literally, well, if someone's stabbing me, you know, I would do anything to get away. But no, you wouldn't. You'd lie on the floor of a chicken shop and get stabbed loads of times. Yeah, because there isn't. I genuinely don't think there's an innate self-preservation ability in that environment. There might be if you're in the Alps and you've broken your leg skiing, you might start to think through how you're going to stay warm and how you're going to get help. But in that environment, you're not doing anything to save yourself.
No. Chances are, if you've not encountered that, if you've not laid down a bit of a blueprint in the mind as to what to do under those circumstances, then you're not doing much. I mean, I don't know if I mentioned it before, these things kind of melt into one at times, but you know, the old kind of story that, well, the data that I read a long time ago was, you know, in things like airplane crashes, you know, people are terrified of flying. Statistically, it's pretty darn safe compared with other modes of transport and so on. And you know, you don't hear about most of the crashes because no one's hurt and there's not many people on the plane. They're kind of cargo planes that make an emergency landing and something. You hear about the big ones, right? You know, the ones that make the news where lots of lives are lost. But apparently in many cases, not ones where they just kind of wipe out immediately, but in many cases, you know, the largest cause of death is kind of burning in seats, rather than, you know, when people are exiting the plane, so being caught in situ. And often people sit there and the data tends to show that a number of people sit there and burn with their lap belts still tied, because they've never gone through the process of thinking, what should I do in an emergency? And that's why they're all so hot on, listening to the safety announcement, even if you've flown before, because it reinforces those neural pathways, that blueprint in the mind, which is, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I have to take my seatbelt? I have to get my, because otherwise you're waiting around for an instruction to do it, and no instruction comes, and so you just sit there because the brain doesn't compute. There's no, and in that situation, freeze is the response that you get, and that's innate in the sense that the brain says to you, look, you've done nothing and you're still alive, right? So it can't be that bad, right? So carry on doing nothing.
Right? It's working so far.
And my guess is that something like that happened there. The difference between going fetal and fighting back was that he didn't have a blueprint for fighting back, but the brain went, okay, well, look, you've fallen over. It looked like you just slipped over, right? You've been stabbed, but you're still alive, right? You did nothing, right? You just like, probably pleading with him or something, right? That's working. It's working. You're not dead yet, right? You're not dead yet, right? The sun's going to rise tomorrow, right? Because it rose yesterday, and it rose today, and it's going to rise tomorrow. But of course, that the history of past events is no necessary connection to future ones, and so the fact that the last 5 stabs didn't kill him immediately doesn't mean the next one won't. But the brain can't kind of play that game, reading it forwards without the blueprint to follow. And so it just got in that kind of fear freeze moment, which no doubt some of the third parties did as well, and would do as well.
But you mentioned a good point, sort of the brain's going, well, this is working, I'm on the floor, okay, I'm not dead yet. And you said it looks like he was sort of trying to placate things and whatever, and he was absolutely submissive and passive, and it didn't stop the assault. No. It didn't work. Going, you've stabbed me, yes, I'm on the floor, I'm now fucked, please don't stab me, please don't stab me anymore. Got stabbed more. Whatever he was saying, stop, didn't stop. So no appealing to any sense of rational sort of, please stop doing what you're doing is going to help you in any way at all.
No. It's trying to talk his way out of a fight, right? And once the action begins, there's no talking your way out of it, right?
No, your man's going until he's runs out of steam, sees the light, hears the blue, the blue lights and the sirens,
Or he's done what he's done, and through being amped up, he finally realizes, actually, I've done what I needed to do. I didn't need to come here and kill him. It didn't look like he was determined to kill him, and then suddenly stopped for any reason. He came to stab him up. And
to get some video. And he didn't stop until then. So
no,
and then the last bit, I suppose, it didn't stop until then, despite all those people around it. Like we've mentioned, people don't just suddenly. It's not that they never do, but the opportunity was there for someone to pick up one of those shitty plywood tables and brain him with it, or grab the oil or whatever. And it doesn't happen. And then the chap comes in and escorts him out, and it looks almost civil, Ultimately, that guy on the floor would have seen all those people around him not doing anything. And the reality is nobody will help you. They might not be capable of, they might not want to. They might make an elective decision to say, I am not getting involved there. I don't know you. Tough shit, but no one's going to help. And we teach it to the kids. We talk about if there's an incident and you call for help. I think we do it on some of the other courses. You never call for help. Everybody ignores shouting for help, and you tell them to call. You tell them to yell fire because that gets attention. No one then comes and helps because they've seen what's happened. What you get is attention, and a weight of attention might put too much focus on the aggressor and drive them away. But it's not a proactive. You'll get people in who will then start like whipping out the nunchucks and sorting things out or whatever they're going to do. And certainly calling help. No one's helping. No one wants to hear, please help me. No. You're like, fuck, what's that? I don't want, I don't want what's happening.
No, I reject the moral pressure. And I mean, it's very difficult to enlist people to help in that kind of situation. You're the only person you can rely upon. And that's a valuable lesson. Unfortunately, it's not one that you remember in the moment, I guess. And remembering to shout stuff, it's like, there's lots of kind of advice that I've heard down the years on what to shout, and I think it's probably you regress to what you kind of intuitively go with, which is help, help, help. You're not going to shout out. I've heard people shout, you shout as a terrorist. So well, then you're going to be left all on your own.
As everyone goes.
I forget someone else. I quite like this next one, which is I forget who it was that I used to train with. It used to, you don't shout terrorist. You point at me, you shout, it's a paedophile. It's paedophile. In the thought that 3 or 4 other people are so angry at that they suddenly join and start to fill him in. But in the moment, will you have the presence of mind, while you're being stabbed repeatedly in the torso and the legs, to shout he's a paedophile? Like, no, you're not unless you've done that 1,000 times and your go-to is he's a paedophile rather than help, help, help. Right? Chances are you're going to be shouting stop, help, stop, help.
It's got to be monosyllabic or whatever. Once it's a sentence. I mean, I know in myself, and I think, similar to you, one of the first things for me is I can't really talk. If I'm amped up, I might have a plan about, sticking one on your chin, but don't make me talk, because I'll sort of, or like, and nothing comes out, and the voice is fucked. Like, first thing when I'm under adrenaline, I really have to sort of force myself to get over it and then go, right, and give some sort of order or do whatever we're going to do.
So some complicated dialogue which is going to have kind of multiple syllable words in it, which is going to somehow trip off the tongue under adrenaline. No, you go mid-brain and you can't communicate. I sound like Scooby-Doo. Everything goes up high as when I start to talk when I'm adrenalized, and start to get out of breath as well. I mean, trying to talk is one good way of trying to keep breathing, but hitting and shouting is another, right? You'll start to breathe once you start to get angry and hit and scream. But no, it's a good lesson that you're not going to suddenly reverse all that non-preparation and suddenly do wonderfully well. Chances are you're not going to be the exception to the norm, and suddenly have the mindset to go at it, whether you're the victim of that violence or whether you're a third party. Stood around, thinking whether they should intervene, or wondering whether to intervene. It's a good point. And also, I think the point you made about, it's brutal, right? Again, we often fight against that kind of sanitized version of violence. People don't want to watch violence; it's too brutal. But their idea of what it actually is then is very different, and so you get that kind of, well, why can't you just do this? Why can't you show me something, a move that I can use? And outside of the kind of the 8-week basic combatives course, which is a different animal, right? Just a few skills that might serve people well in some situations. When we're talking about longer term training, right? The idea that there's some simple move that he could have applied there in that situation, right? Betokens a naivety about the brutality of violence, and in particular knife crime, and an unwillingness to accept the reality of it. So there's that kind of not knowing what goes on, but even when you kind of half suspect what it is, being unwilling to accept that that's what it's like, and therefore that there's no easy solution to it, right? So you get this kind of, a what if, well, why can't I do that? What's the perfect solution here? As though there's some kind of move that you can use against a, kind of a determined attacker who's going to stab you like a sewing machine. And that's why I picked that video, because it's so different to the last one where he stood off pricking at a distance, trying to work his way in. This is the second dynamic that we talked about, the guy that just comes in relentlessly like a sewing machine, and try doing your inside defense and control his wrist from there. Right? Dude's going to be slicing your fingers off and sticking you in the eyeball.
Absolutely. And it sort of, we start to look at, what can you do? It's difficult to advise. You can generalize and say something, if you've had some training. And I think last week, you mentioned it, because the sort of the defender in the situation in the last video put into his boxing stance and then never threw a punch in the whole thing, never, at no point threw a punch. And we said then, you stick 2 or 3 in a straight line down at somebody's jaw and just knock them back a bit is the start of something. You know, if you can then hone that a little bit and hit hard a couple of times, how much would it have checked that guy? You know, the attacker in this one, he didn't look huge. He wasn't particularly built. You know, yes, he's got a knife, so clearly he's, you know, he's in charge of the situation, certainly in his head. He's not going to have any concept of getting twatted out of it. And what's his plan if he does? Has he ever taken, you know, has he ever had a good punch in the face since he was, you know, 12 years old in school? You know, you never know, but you stick 1 or 2 on him and he takes a step back, and you've got a moment where you're not being stitched up like sewing machine, you know, by a sewing machine. You know, the game changes maybe.
Yeah, that ability to hit hard and the presence of mind, which only comes through, you know, kind of repeatedly hitting people in training and hitting them under pressure and not having to think too much about it. You know, so the skill is second nature, the application of the skill is second nature, and maybe even running through very similar kind of patterns of interplay or scenarios. You know, you can't revise every individual scenario, but you know, kind of the sudden attack. Yeah, I mean, you know, if that door had come open and he had just immediately punched him 3 times in the face as hard as he could, then it might have been a wholly different situation. But you could see he was in kind of, you know, hold the door shut and then back away as quickly as possible, trip over and fall down. But you know, had the mindset have been, you know, more combative, right, or and the skill had been there to hit hard, then, you know, stepping into that open gap as the door came open before, you know, he kind of got into his attack mode with the knife and just blasting him a couple of times, you know, would have been a big help, right? You know, it couldn't have probably done him any more harm than what he got, right?
Well, yeah.
I mean, it could have done him more harm. You know, it could have taken a slash to the side of the neck or whatever. But in terms of, you know, running the odds, right? You know, he was running more of the odds by, you know, being passive on the floor,
lying down,
and just taking whatever the guy decided to give him, than taking the fight to him. And you know, I still think, you know, the first priority is, you know, like shake the guy's brain in that situation. You know, I'm a big fan of, you know, and we practice a lot, you know, controlling, gripping up, and so on. But you know, as a first resort, you know, I think if you're wrestling with a guy with a knife, then, you know, you've lost an opportunity to bang him out cold. And secondly, you know, he's fighting back and he's biting and he's gouging and he's trying to get that knife free, and probably so are his mates as well. You know, they're doing that while you're wrestling with the dude with the knife. You know, you're on a one-way track, really. And so, you know, the first line of defense is, you know, smacking. You know, I hear people say, well, you know, if I hit him and he goes back, then he's just going to come forward again, then I've got more trouble or whatever. Well, yeah, but you've already hit him once, right? You know, if you miss him, then you're in grappling range because he's going to be closing on you and you're going to be getting stabbed, and you've got to control that knife. And if you hit him, then you've got another opportunity to continue. And again, you have to play that by ear. That only comes with kind of stuff that we talked about last time, which is, you know, the individual skills, the technical aspect of it, which is practiced, but then doing it under pressure and honing the attributes, the distancing, the timing, you know, you've got to practice your covers, your blocks, and so on. But you know, once you've got those techniques, those technical abilities, right, then actually the learning part really comes down to the bit which is, you know, playing with the resistant attacker who will mess you up if you don't hit them cleanly, and then continue the fight from there, continuing on the floor. You know, if you're not practicing hitting people as they arrive with a knife, if you're not practicing controlling them, if you're not practicing fighting off your back with them stood up trying to stab you, if you're not practicing on your back with them sat on top of you trying to stab you, or at the side and knelt by you trying to stab you, if you're not practicing it with them behind you, if you're not practicing in the car, then you're not really doing knife defense, right? You know, if you just stood there, you know, grabbing the knife out of the air or blocking and punching. You're doing the first stage of a very small part of that skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. The only other thing I think it sort of maybe just sort of come to me now on that, and it ties into the last video. The guy in the last video who jumps in and that, it's like, who attacks like that? Well, people fucking attack like that, I think the first 2 or 3 stabs, it's the other way around. The guy comes up and under, your classic P1, like, basic sort of over the top or underhand stab.
And then when he's on the floor, he's stabbing him straight.
And he's stabbing him straight, just nice and straight, and, they're your progressions into the basics of sort of knife attack and defense. And, he's not here doing some special thing. He's not being tricky with it. He's just going, get the pointy bit and go into a bit of you. There it goes. And if you're stood up, there it goes. And the other one, when we're both stood up, there it goes, because that gives me the most gross motor to drive it into, because, guaranteed he's not overly thinking how to knife fight his way through this, sort of, situation. He's just going, fucking stick it in him, So that's 2 actual, the last 2 videos where it fits in with some of the basics that we begin with. And then you just change how you deal with it. Like you say, are you on the floor? Are you on the side? Are you in a car? Are you pushed against the car? Have you fallen down the bloody stairs? But the point is, the attack's still coming in the same. It doesn't suddenly turn into some sort of skillful, knife trick.
Charlie knife master.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, spinning around your little karambit and stuff. No. It's a kitchen knife that's going at you in a couple of ways, So.
And in a frenzied manner, right? And having the headspace to deal with that, is much more than, have I got my outside block, inside block working properly? The idea of stopping that, and no, absolutely, and the mindset that has to go into that, right? I know we've talked about that in previous meets, but the idea that you can change that mindset quickly just by learning a few techniques, again, is one of the kind of things that we often fight against. That what you need is technical ability, and that will overcome the ferocity of violence. And actually, right, that's not a solution, right? The only way of overcoming a ferocious attack is to be more ferocious than the other person, but be able to access that as well in the blink of an eye, right? And that takes a lot of time and practice, right? In the traditional martial arts, the tradition in terms of kind of the combat sports that work, boxing, judo, Thai boxing, MMA, and so on. The real stuff in terms of martial arts, broadly understood, that kind of mindset comes over time. You work hard in the gym, and you fight against opponents who are really trying to batter you in the ring or on the cage or on the mat. And you imagine someone who's got 10 or 12 semi-pro MMA fights in that situation. Chances are they're going to be much more combative than given. Not necessarily, right? It's a different environment and so on and so forth. But the chances that they would be much more combative because they're used to violence, they're used to doing it, they're used to the idea of getting hurt, they're used to overcoming that and going forwards, sets them up better. Often in Krav Maga, combatives, we don't have that kind of focus on particular events, right? So there's not building for something in 2 months' time when you're going to compete against someone who has had 6 fights and won the last 5 of them, or whatever it is. So we don't have that outlet. So we have to replicate some of that in training. Right? People say, classes are really hard. We get these visitors that come from other clubs, or they come and try stuff for the first time, and they I've done a bit, I've done this, I've done that. And they go, your classes are really hard, right? They're exhausting. They're quite painful at times. They're tough classes. Physically and mentally demanding. You go, yeah, but they have to be, right? Because we can't take it easy and then build you up towards the fight in the last 3 weeks when you'll suddenly get, and you'll get this kind of, you'll get acclimatized to this. You'll get resilient over a period of 4 or 5 years as your competitive career increases and you become better. Actually, you know, there is no competitive career for you to scale towards in that way. So classes have to be hard because there is nothing outside of classes. So there has to be that kind of pressuring in classes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think, yeah, where we are in, you know, society and in the world, you know, so in sort of Western society in 2025, generally 99.9% of us are a long way removed from violence,
Yeah.
unless we volunteer to put ourselves in front of it. And so you get the people who are turning up who are wanting some techniques. Why do they think that a technique solves the problem? So their only experience can be films and books and cartoons and series where everybody's slick and has got a cool catchphrase or a line or some sort of, you know, sort of 5 minute sort of lecture before they then kick the arse of 25 people in the room, you know. And it's always, they're always kicking everyone's ass because they've got cool skills. It's always slick stuff that deals with the issue by doing amazing things that you could learn to do, you know, but you don't know how to do yet. You know, I mean, there's so few sort of genuine sort of shows of violence and sort of countering violence that I don't think people know what they need to come and ask for or look to seek and find, and you know.
Yeah, and then they see the kind of people that train regularly, you know, and you know, look at the members in the club that we've got, and look at who they are, how they are, and so on, and how they train, and what they do in that training. I mean, you know, what a great bunch of people for a start, you know, helping each other, suffering together to a certain extent, but kind of all pulling in the same direction. But it's very visible how they are when someone new comes into the room compared with that new person, right? Who just doesn't, you know, yet in many cases will become part of that, but just doesn't have that kind of attitude that kind of, you know, club members that have been there for a while have, or develop, you know, over a period of months and so on, right? You know, and normal, reasonable people, right? You know, not the kind of people that would go off to MMA or Thai boxing because they have no interest in kind of competing and doing stuff like that, and fair play, right? You know, that's not for everyone. They're people who are genuinely interested in their own self-protection. They're concerned by violence, but they adopt that attitude of, you know, actually this is, you know, I'm gonna work hard. This is gonna be hard, and I'm gonna get something out of this every week that improves my chances, along with all the other stuff they get in terms of fun and camaraderie and all that kind of stuff. But the noticeable difference in mindset between people that train in the club on a regular basis and newcomers who aren't used to that environment, I think, is quite telling. And we've talked about the kind of perception in changes of, you know, kind of people's attitudes towards violence and their kind of resilience in, you know, previous meetings. But and one thing that just related to that it's only anecdotal, but one of the policemen in the club kind of said a while ago when we were talking about youth violence, I said, you know, most of us grew up, even though we, you know, we're kind of not criminal kids or anything, but, you know, in and around getting punched up and stuff. You know, you always having a scrap here and there, or, you know, your mate was in a scrap yesterday or whatever it was, you know. But that, my perception of that seems to have changed, and his view was that, yeah, it has, right? You know, what you see now in that kind of early teens to early 20s is a much wider separation. Most of them are you know, the kind of PlayStation generation, are totally kind of non-violent, no kind of, you know, somewhat, you know, non-resilient. But then there's that minority who are hyper-violent, like hyper-violent, whereas the gap was never that big. There was always a kind of a closer relationship at the middle of that spectrum, right? There was a big bump at the middle of that spectrum, and there were a few hyper-violent, a few non-violent, but that's a big gulf. Most have shifted towards one end, but the other smaller group have shifted right to the other end and become hyper-violent in terms of what they're, you know, what they're prepared to do the fact they don't care about the consequences. They literally don't care about the consequences. They're happy to carry weapons and to seriously harm other people. They really don't care. And they're often training in kind of boxing or kickboxing or MMA or something like that as well. So super violent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is clear. The number of scraps, organized after school, 5 o'clock, we're gonna have a scrap. And it didn't, nobody died. It doesn't mean people didn't get hurt, but, and I'm not saying we should go back to that as a good thing, but it was more commonplace, and it was more like way more people got involved in, oh, we bumped into these kids from the other school in town, and or we were in the wrong pub and these guys came in, and there was a massive punch up. I've got a broken wrist and he's got a black eye, but no one's just getting shit all the time.
But it seems to be less of that as far as I can see. I remember it's only anecdotal, but the amount of kind of hyper violence at the younger end of the spectrum is seems to be increasing. Which kind of one last thing, which was I mean, in that situation, you just think about from a third party perspective. If you're in there, picking up your order or whatever it is, and that kicks off, you want to make yourself safe for a start, right? Whether you think about getting involved or not, different views on that. Do I really want to get involved in that? For them, I don't know. Maybe I feel compelled to, but there were loads of kind of weapons of opportunity there. Right? It wasn't like McDonald's with the seats and the tables screwed down. Right? There were kind of chairs with 4 legs on them, tables with little legs on them, which you could probably pick up. Probably loads of stuff behind
the door had just been kicked off. I think it had broken. Had 2 massive bar handles. There was stuff about, but do you see it if you've not been told to see it?
And is your natural reaction to grab it, right? Is that your learned behavior to grab something at that point and even the score up? I'm not going to be involved in any fight if I can really help it, right? I'm not going to do anything for ego gratification. I don't think I've really ever been in that kind of mindset. But in which case, why wouldn't you arm yourself in that situation where a knife's flashing around? Well, the only thing that's stopping you is the fact that you just can't compute what's going on and your brain's not telling you to do it. It also raises the other question, is like, seriously, if that's what you're seeing on the street, there's an argument that many people in the combatives community put forward, which is, why as a normal decent citizen who wouldn't become involved in violence unless they were attacked, why would you walk around without being armed yourself, right? Because in that situation, right, like you say, that guy led him away, right? He was playing with fire there, right? The guy just shrugged him off and stuck it up under his chin, right? One motion, he would have just killed him outright. And surely if you're really going to intervene, then brain him with something, right? Knock him the hell out with a tool. And many people in the kind of broader combatives community, in this day and age, with that level of ferocity and a weapon employed, why would you be hamstrung by the fear of things like prosecution for carrying something that in a pinch would probably make the difference between life and death?
No,
that's not a recommendation that anyone do that, but and I wouldn't want to give that kind of impression. That I would say it's an advisable thing to do. But many people are, well, I got my Krav Maga, right? I got my hands. That ain't nothing compared with having a weapon to use in that situation.
Tool bearing creatures. We got here in front of all the other ones because we learned to pick up a stick and twat another monkey. It's quite simple. But I mean, I think we're just hitting it in the hour. But you're dead right. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a military friend of mine, completely nothing to do. It was to do with sort of global situations. And he just sort of said in passing, he said, freedom is never given, it's taken. And we were talking about sort of countries, revolutions and that, but the same applies here. If you want to walk around feeling free of violence, if you want to feel safe where you are, that is not your reliance on society being safe and the police keeping you safe. That has to be you being able to take your freedom to go where you want and do within reason what you want to do. You have to be willing to take that, and being tooled up, being skilled up, doing something to attune you to it is I think is vital. I think I'd be terrified at the thought of anybody I know not knowing how to at least think about bloody running away, because whatever it is, if you haven't thought about it, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I take my own advice seriously. I try not to go to these places. I know where the violent places are around here. Although I travel now, I don't know where the violent places are. You're much more kind of the fortune's behest there. I know I try not to go to places where there might be try not to go to the shitty areas, try not to do all this. But sometimes you do it inadvertently, or you just don't have a choice, right? I've got to go to a meeting this week, and it's not in a particularly nice area, and it's like, well, what choice have I got there? I've got to go there. I can't just live my life in the countryside all the time, away from everything, never seeing anyone. There are times when I have to go to places where the risk increases, and that's inevitable. And so you can't always be that kind of opt out of everything to keep yourself safe. Sometimes you do have to walk in places where it's a little bit more risky than otherwise, and then the other skills kick in and so on. But I understand the argument that says, well, why through fear of kind of illegal, if you're not, as long as you're not someone that's going to kind of stab anyone yourself without reason, right? If you trust yourself, why be disarmed by a law that actually doesn't serve you well? And I kind of get that argument, not that I would particularly follow it, but I know it's an argument that's often made, that the only people that are benefited by that law are the ones that actually do carry weapons and want to stab you.
100%. Yeah. I think we mentioned, you and I both travel in all sorts of places, and I think the first thing you look at is what can I carry here, right? Can I carry a blade? Can I carry a kosh? Can I carry and if I can, if it's more than sort of half a day for a meeting, it's like, I'll carry that, absolutely. You maximize what you're allowed to do, but you're always hamstrung by this sort of Western mentality that sort of society is what keeps you safe. The structures that sustain society, the police and the security forces and that, and leave it in our hands. Anti-vigilante sort of sentiment.
You're not to be trusted with a weapon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, I'm not to be trusted. No, I fully trust myself that I wouldn't use it wrongly, but that. I think the fear of punishment is much greater for me than the fear of being attacked. So, but no, I mean, when I lived in the States, and then when I've revisited the States, where I lived, find out what you can carry. Or actually, where I lived, you can carry pretty much whatever you want, even as a non-American, barring firearms and so on. Like pepper spray. Oh, great. Well, I'll have a can of pepper spray because that's really effective, right? It's manners in a can. And it pretty quickly re-educates men and dogs, right? And so it's a great soft option. It's a class 1 firearm, whatever it is here now, right? You're going to go to prison if you have that, or you can buy it, I don't suppose. But everyone had it on a keychain. Use it instead of your asthma inhaler occasionally, by accident. But and then when we used to holiday in the US, go to Florida, and I can have pepper spray here. Right? First thing you do when you go to the mall is pick up a can of pepper spray. Why? Because Florida's violent, right? Florida's dangerous, right? And most of them have, there's a lot of guns in Florida, and pepper spray doesn't seem that bad in comparison with what else is available to the natives. So I'll have a can of pepper spray. Right? So within context, I mean, for us mainly it's going to be weapons of opportunity, and that's the thing, that what you can pick up in the moment to assist you. But
maybe that's one to look at, and one for the future, expand on.
Yeah, but I think that video is fairly instructive in terms of kind of the mode of attack and the different response to it, and then thinking about how training might reverse some of that in terms of attributes and skills. So I thought it was a good, good addenda or follow up to the one that we did last time.
No, excellent. Yeah, I think some sort of glaring takeaways. Don't do fuck all.
Yeah, train. Get your training. Get training so that you don't do fuck all, right? Yeah, and training stuff that replicates that. That deals with those kinds of situations, because that's becoming more and more kind of the issue. But good.
Excellent.
All right, on to the next one then.
On to the next. My turn. I'll have a look at something. We'll be back by unpopular demand. But yeah, no, good to talk.
Yeah, and I had a couple of people message via the channel with some questions. So maybe we'll cover those next time. So a quick shout out if anyone's made it this far and didn't switch off after the first 5 minutes, and that people are listening. People do message, say they're listening, they enjoy it. Kind of casual conversation rather than something that's too scripted and showing off about all the techniques that they do. I've never been a fan of kind of instructionals online. They always look a bit rubbish, to be honest. And then you just invite the key warriors. But few people, have messaged, say they listen, they enjoy it. So if you have made it to the end, like, subscribe, share.
Ask questions.
Yeah, and send us questions, and we will do our best to deal with them at some point, but and give some thoughts on it.
Yeah, feedback and response is always welcome. So otherwise it's just two old bearded guys talking to each other, isn't it?
Otherwise I just make some up and
I might, my pseudonyms. I'll send some questions in, some good ones for you. All right,
good to see you.
Brilliant.
See you soon.
Catch you in the week.
Bye.
See you.